Welcome back to the Sequential Zohar. In the last chapter, we walked through the Zohar's account of how the infinite light was concealed, structured into a chamber called Elohim, and seeded with the Hebrew letters, the DNA of creation. We ended with the 42-letter name engraved at the foundation of everything. Now, in chapter 3, the Zohar takes us into something deeply intimate. It reveals the spiritual mechanics of Hebrew, not just the letters themselves, but the vowels and the cantillation marks, the intonations, the melodies. And what it teaches here will permanently change the way you think about the Hebrew language. Because the Zohar is telling us that these are not linguistic features. They are not grammar. They are cosmic forces. The letters, the vowels, and the cantillation marks are the very instruments through which the universe is built and sustained. This chapter is short, only 3 verses, but do not let that fool you. What is compressed into these 3 verses is one of the most important frameworks in all of Kabbalistic thought. The relationship between body, spirit, and soul. The relationship between structure, animation, and direction. All of it encoded in the mechanics of sacred language. So let's walk through it. Verse 14 opens by returning to the same verse from Daniel that began the previous chapter. And they who are wise shall shine. But now the Zohar reads it through a completely different lens. It says, and they who are wise shall shine like the cantillation marks that the letters and the vowels follow. They move along like soldiers following their king. Now, pause on that image for a moment. Soldiers following their king. This is a military metaphor. It is a metaphor of order, hierarchy, and movement. And the Zohar is applying it to the internal structure of the Hebrew language itself. There are 3 layers at work here. First are the letters, the otiyot, the vowels, the nekudot, and the cantillation marks, the te'amim, also called the trop. The Zohar says the letters are the body, the vowels are the spirit, and the cantillation marks, the melody, the intonation, are the guiding force that sets everything in motion. Think about what this means on a practical level. When you look at a Torah scroll, you see only letters, no vowels, no cantillation marks, just the raw consonantal text. And the reason for this is that the letters are the body, the visible, physical structure. They are what can be seen. But the vowels, the Nekudot, are invisible on the scroll. They exist, but they operate from a hidden dimension. They are the breath, the spirit that animates the letters. Without the vowels, the letters are silent. They are form without life. The vowels give the letters their sound, their pronunciation, their expression. And then, above both of these, you have the cantillation marks, the te'amim. These are the melodic notations that tell you how to chant the Torah. They dictate the rise and fall of the voice, the pauses, the connection between words. They are the musical architecture. And the Zohar says these three layers correspond to body, spirit, and the soul, force that directs them both. The cantillation marks are the king. The letters and vowels are the soldiers. When the melody moves, everything moves with it. When the melody pauses, everything stops. This is not a metaphor about music. This is a teaching about the structure of reality itself. Every level of existence, from the highest spiritual realm to the densest physical matter, is structured according to the same threefold pattern. There is always a body, there is always a spirit that animates that body, and there is always a directing intelligence that tells both of them where to go and what to do. You can see this pattern everywhere once you know to look for it. In the human being, the body, the soul, and the neshama that directs them. In a nation, the people, the culture, and the leadership that guides both. In a symphony, the instruments, the notes, and the conductor who holds it all together. The Zohar is showing us that this pattern originates in the very structure of sacred language. In Kabbalistic terms, the letters correspond to the vessels, the kelim. The vowels correspond to the lights, the orot, that fill those vessels. And the cantillation marks correspond to the ta'amei Torah, the supernal pleasures, the deepest will of the Creator that directs everything from above. So when you hear the Torah chanted in a synagogue, what you are actually hearing is a living model of how creation works. The melody, the te'amim, is the divine will setting the pattern. The vowels, the Nekudot, are the spiritual energy flowing into form. And the letters, the otiyot, are the vessels that give that energy shape and structure in this world. The Zohar says when the tune of the cantillation marks travels along, the letters and vowels march in step with it. When the tune stops, they stop as well. Creation does not run on its own. It is not a machine that was wound up and left to tick. It is a living song, sustained moment by the melody of the divine will. If that melody were to stop, even for an instant, everything would cease to exist. Now, verse 15 takes this teaching and maps it onto the verse from Daniel with extraordinary precision. And the Zohar says, "And they who are wise shall shine alludes to the letters and the vowels that shine. The brightness alludes to the tune of the cantillation marks. The firmament alludes to the expansion of the tune. All those intonations that flow and expand as the melody flows. So the verse from Daniel is now revealed as a coded description of these three layers. The wise who shine are the letters and vowels. The brightness is the melody. And the firmament is the expansion of that melody across the entire structure of creation. Then the Zohar introduces a phrase that appears throughout the Zohar. They who turn many to righteousness. And it says this alludes to the music of the cantillation marks that bring the journeying to a pause. The pauses, the stops, the moments of silence between the notes. And why is this connected to righteousness? Because the pauses are what enable the meaning of the words to be heard clearly. Without pauses, without punctuation, without the silence between the sounds, everything would blur together into an undifferentiated noise. Meaning requires distinction. Meaning requires boundaries. And those boundaries, those pauses, are acts of righteousness because they allow the light to be received properly. This is actually a profound spiritual principle. Righteousness, in Hebrew, zedek, is about creating the right containers, the right boundaries, the right distinctions, so that energy can flow where it needs to go. The cantillation marks do exactly this. They structure the melody so that the words can be understood, so that the light can be received. Without this structuring, even the most powerful light would be useless, because there would be no way to differentiate one thing from another, no way to assign meaning, no way to direct the energy where it is needed. Then the Zohar introduces the image of the apirion, the Palanquin. This is King Solomon's Palanquin, the royal litter, the divine carriage described in Shir Hasirim, the Song of Songs. And the Zohar says the wise, the masculine, are the supernal pillars and sockets of this Palanquin. What is the Palanquin? In Kabbalistic terms, the Palanquin is Malkuth, the Shekhinah, the divine presence as she dwells in this world. She is the bride. She is the vessel that receives all the light from above. And the pillars and sockets that support her are the 6 Sefirot of Zeir Anpin: Hesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. So the masculine, the wise ones, are themselves the supernal pillars. They observe intelligently, meaning they look upon the light of the firmament, and they use that light to determine what is needed to sustain the Palanquin. And then the Zohar adds something remarkable. It quotes Psalm 41, "Blessed is he that considers the poor." And it says the masculine is Zeir Anpin, and the poor is his female principle, Malkuth. Zeir Anpin receives the brightness not for his own sake, but for the sake of the poor one who needs it, the Shekhinah. This is one of the great teachings of the Zohar. The purpose of receiving light is to share it. Zeir Anpin does not hoard the illumination of the firmament. He receives it specifically so that he can transmit it downward to sustain the Palanquin, to sustain the Shekhinah, to sustain us. And if the 6 Sefirot of Zeir Anpin did not shine, if they did not receive and transmit this light, they would not be able to study the Palanquin and determine what is necessary for its restoration. The Zohar is saying that without this light flowing through the system, even the upper worlds would not know what the lower worlds need. This is the principle of looking intelligently, being a maskil. It means having the awareness, the sensitivity, the illumination to perceive what needs to be corrected, what needs to be supported, what needs to be restored. And that awareness only comes through the light of the firmament. Verse 16 brings the teaching to its culmination. The Zohar says, "The brightness of the firmament rests upon the wise ones." And it connects this to a verse from Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 22. "And over the heads of the living creature was the likeness of a firmament, like the color of the terrible eyes." The living creature, the Kayah, is a reference to the angelic beings that Ezekiel saw in his vision of the Merkavah, the divine chariot. In Kabbalistic terms, the Kayah represents Malkuth, the Palanquin itself, the vessel that carries the divine presence. And over the head of this living creature is the firmament. The brightness shines from above, down through the firmament, onto the heads of the living creature. This is the cascade of light from the highest levels all the way down into manifest reality. The Zohar then says this brightness shines upon the entire Zeir Anpin, which is called the Torah. And this is a statement that deserves to be absorbed slowly. Zeir Anpin, the 6 Sefirot of the emotional and relational attributes of God, is called the Torah. The Torah is not a book. The Torah is a Partzuf. It is the living body of Zeir Anpin. Every letter, every word, every verse, every story is an aspect of this living spiritual structure. When you study Torah, you are not reading texts. You are interfacing with the body of the divine. And the light that illuminates this body comes from the firmament above, from the concealed brightness that we discussed in the previous chapter. And the Zohar says the brightness shines upon the heads of the living creature, which is the Palanquin. And the wise heads, the pillars and sockets of Zeir Anpin, who are wise, shine constantly. They look upon the firmament to receive the light that emanates from there. They shine constantly and they never stop. This light is not intermittent. It is not seasonal. It is not dependent on human effort in the way we might imagine. The Torah shines forever and never stops. But here is the key. Our ability to receive that light, our capacity to perceive it and benefit from it, is dependent on our becoming maskilim, on our becoming wise, on our developing the spiritual intelligence to look upon the firmament and receive what is offering. So, what has this chapter given us? It has given us the architecture of sacred language as a model for the architecture of creation itself. Letters are bodies. Vowels are spirits. Cantillation marks are the directing soul force. And this threefold structure maps onto the relationship between the vessels, the lights, and the divine will that guides them both. It has shown us that the purpose of receiving light is always transmission, always for the sake of the other. Zeir Anpin receives for the sake of Malkuth. The wise receive for the sake of the poor. The pillars exist for the sake of the Palanquin. Nothing in the spiritual world receives for its own sake. And it's revealed that the Torah, Zeir Anpin, shines forever. The light never stops. The question is not whether the light is available. The question is whether we have refined our vessels enough to receive it. And the way we refine those vessels is through study, through practice, through the inner work of transformation that the Zohar itself is guiding us through. This is why the Zohar places such emphasis on the act of study itself. Because when you engage with these teachings, you are not merely learning information. You are aligning your own letters, your own body, with the vowels, the spirit, and the cantillation marks, the divine will. You are tuning yourself to the melody of creation. When you hear the Torah chanted, when you hear those ancient melodies, those cantillation marks guiding the letters and the vowels, you are hearing the sound of creation itself. The melody that sustains the worlds, the tune that the soldiers of reality follow as they march behind their king. In the next video, we will continue into the next chapter and keep building. If this series is opening something up for you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Shalom.